Hello and welcome to the Business Today show. I'm Udayan Mukherjee. The union budget is done and dusted, but as they always say, the devil is always in the detail. And the devil sometimes manifests itself a few days down the line, not just the next day, and new things keep cropping up. And there are many analysts of the budget, readers of the budget, but the one who's made a real name for himself over the years in India as the definitive budget expert is one of the finest accountant and tax experts, and now the group CEO of Ambit, Ashok Wadhwa, and I'm very pleased to welcome him on the Business Today show today. Ashok, great to see you on the show, and I want to begin by asking you, how did you make this name for yourself as the go-to man for all union budgets? Because for the longest time, since I've started covering business, it was always, what is Ashok going to say the next morning about the budget? How did you earn this reputation?
Well, thank you for the compliment, Udyan, and very nice to be on the show. But this I think goes to my previous life when I was running the tax practice in Arthur Andersen. At that stage, the only voice on budget was really Mr. Palkiwala, and as a youngster, many of us used to go and ensure that we got a seat literally at his feet, as close as we could, because hearing him was a pleasure, but being close to him and seeing his expressions was just a honor, absolute honor. So we kind of grew up in that era, hearing that budget speech. And then when Anderson started having a more robust tax practice, we thought it was a good idea to do a budget presentation. Initially, we used to do it a day later. And then as more and more competitive pressure came in, because more and more firms decided that it was a good practice to do a budget presentation for your client. Those days, remember, there was no Zoom. So it was all, physical. There was no virtual. And we used to all have to book rooms way in advance at five-star hotels. But it was really largely for the clients, not for the, television audience. And that's really how the practice began during the days in Anderson's. And then, of course, television took over the primary show on the budget. And the practice, I guess, just continued from those days in Anderson's and then into my life in Ambit and RSM.
Do you still find or unearth things in the budget a day later that you could not see while the speech was going on, and you're still surprised by some fine print? Or after so many years, you can more or less get everything done in the first day once you have the document?
So clearly, it's very difficult to be able to both understand and express views on details in the budget document, which is why the initial reaction, which comes either before the budget or just after the budget, is, I would say, is not complete. It's not complete only because you don't have access to the fine print, and as you rightly pointed out, the devil is in the detail. But once you have the fine print, I would think it needs a few hours for those of us who've been in the business long enough to be able to kind of understand what the detailed nuances are. Sometimes it does need a debate between more than 2-3 people to be able to figure out exactly what the essence of the clause or the amendment in the budget is. But I would say by the end of the first day and by the beginning of the second day, when you've read all your newspapers, you're pretty much up to speed with whatever is there in the budget.
No, I ask you because on the evening of the budget, I got a lot of very excited calls from some global investors I have not heard from in a long while, expressing great surprise about the gift city exemptions which have been given. And many of them said, P-notes are back and this is like P-note plus. So it took me a while to figure out what they were talking about. But you must have crunched the numbers. Do you think this is going to be a big door opening up for those old P-note investors post the ban?
Certainly from a gift city perspective, it is a huge win. I think the government over a long period of time has already indicated its desire and made certain amendments to relocate a lot of the financial services activity done on the Indian market, but where the managers and much of the back office activity has been located outside of India. About 3 years ago, government made an amendment in law, which I think was the first definitive sign of the government implementing its vision of wanting to bring back the Indian financial think tank back to India, when they said that if global managers currently sitting outside India but investing in India were to relocate to India, then their presence in India would not constitute permanent establishment. Now, that regulation, when it got announced, I mean, the announcement was big. When the regulation got converted into fine print, there were lots of details which made it a little impractical. And since then, a couple of other amendments have been made to simplify that regulation. I'm not saying it's all there, but clearly government is serious about implementing its vision about bringing the Indian financial think tank back to India. Why should somebody investing in India be sitting in Singapore and making that investment? Why not relocate him to India and provide some element of tax neutrality, which was really the reason why people were either locating themselves then in Singapore or Dubai. I guess P-notes is one such other important instance. We do know that there were billions of dollars invested in the Indian market through P-notes. These P-note structures were all created in different global jurisdictions. And I guess what the government has said is, why not try and find a way to relocate this in India through the GIFT City and give GIFT City even larger credibility and greater footprint to be able to now do much more and become a competitive center to Dubai, Singapore, London, any other jurisdiction that's been used thus far.
You would go to the extent of saying that this is much superior to even the people who are coming in through the Mauritius Treaty earlier?
I would say so, Udayan. Again, I'm not commenting about the legitimacy of the P-note structure itself. But there, one of the concerns government had was we need to have greater diligence done to ensure that only the right and credible, acceptable investors are able to use P-note to invest in Indian market. I'm assuming that appropriate level of safeguards will be implemented, and that the due diligence process, which is implemented by the GIFT City, will ensure that government is satisfied that just the right type of investors that they want in the Indian market are provided the opportunity to invest through the GIFT City. But just comparing it with Mauritius, I would say yes, this is a much more superior, more than even superior, provides greater element of tax certainty to the Mauritius Treaty. And let me explain to you in a minute why. Because in the Mauritius Treaty, like in every other treaty, there is what you call a limitation of benefit clause. Basically, what a limitation of benefit clause says is that only genuine residents of a country are permitted to benefit from the treaty benefits. Now, you could be a genuine resident as a P-note issuer, but as a P-note subscriber whose identity was not known and who's ultimately the beneficial owner, you may or may not be a resident of the Mauritius Treaty. And therefore, there was always this big debate on whether P-note holders, many of who are not residents of Mauritius, were truly entitled to the benefit of the Mauritius-India Treaty. And this has been a kind of a dogged fight between the Revenue Department and the P-note holders. This particular change that the government has announced by amending the Securities Regulation Act and permitting P-notes to come through registered institutions, qualified registered institutions in the GIFT City, now says that both the recipient of the income and then the distribution eventually is tax-free. So it takes away that controversy that P-note subscribers had in terms of their own residency in Mauritius. Now this is going to be, from a tax perspective, a very attractive structure.
Let me come from the institutional side to the individual side. I mean, for the wealthy taxpayers like yourself, did it come as a surprise, this surcharge going down from 37.5 to 25%? I mean, knocking it down to 42, from 42 point something to 39%, because the government is usually not keen to lower the tax burden on the top end. A, did it surprise you? And B, what was the thinking like, you think, that may have prompted such a move?
Well, I think it's a positive surprise, but I won't say it was totally unexpected. I think the finance minister in the previous one or two budgets had alluded to the fact that this extra surcharge, which at one time was kind of presented as a COVID surcharge, would get addressed once the challenges of COVID receded. Um, I think the government recognizes that there is serious tax buoyancy, right? I mean, if you look at the tax to GDP ratio, it used to be high single digit. It's already moved up to low double digit. So, we're now 11% on tax to GDP ratio. A lot of contribution does come from high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals. And I think it's fair because, my own view is that even at 39%, we are perhaps a little too expensive. A better tax rate in the long term when we have managed our fiscal deficit better and when we have even greater compliance in this country is perhaps a 35% rate. And where government has been so kind and generous in reducing tax rates for corporates, first to 25 and now for manufacturing companies to 15, why not provide similar benefit to the uppermost tax rate and bring it down to 35%? So I think it's a very fair move. It's a move that perhaps, also supports government's larger intention of putting more disposable income and encouraging people to continue consuming. After all, consumption is one of the aggressive engines that is firing for the Indian economy at this point of time.
Well, they're also doing it for the middle class, but opinion is very divided, Ashok, on how many people would finally find it convenient or attractive to move to the new regime. I mean, we've spoken to tax experts. Some of them say not more than 10-20% will move. Some say maybe 50% of people will move, particularly the young. So you must have had some analysis done on this. Do you think the exemptions which have come through in this budget in the income category of between 7 and 15 lakhs will actually draw people to the new regime?
It will be a slow process, but the Revenue Secretary in his post-budget speech said it quite clearly. We would like to move people towards a simpler tax regime, which provides, a higher exemption and then no further concessions beyond that. So I'm sure what began as the first exercise last year continues to be further encouragement this year. And you will see more and more such differentiation created in future budgets. If that's the government's intention, then that's where the government will take everybody. And I'm in the longer run, a simple tax return with a simple tax regime, faceless tax assessment will address a lot of pain that we've been complaining about from the past. Having said that, there is one challenge, and you saw what happened to the life insurance companies yesterday, which is that, historically, we have all grown up in planning our taxes with these tax concessions, ATC, ATCC, ATD, a variety of sections. One of them, of course, is insurance premium paid for your life. And when you move people to this regime, you are making that insurance policy, certainly from a saving perspective, less attractive. So protection and saving were the two reasons why people took these insurance policies. You're taking out one of the two incentives. And Indians are driven. We are driven. We've grown up thinking about saving taxes, and we are driven by that. So it's a little unfair to the insurance companies, but I think in the long run, a simple tax return, a simple tax regime, and faceless assessment are really the way to go.
I was talking to Sanjeev Bajaj about this thing yesterday, this insurance thing, and of course, it had come as a surprise to him, as most insurance companies. But how big a blow is it, you think, for them?
I think some insurance companies announced that the so-called jumbo policy, where you pay more than 5 lakh rupees as a premium, and which has now become a subject matter of debate. These were saving products, and clearly that's a big blow. I mean, that's a big blow. And one insurance company announced that almost 10% of their premium was related to such jumbo policies. Now, if this is going to be taxed because that's the new legislation, then in the short term, it certainly has an impact. I'm sure in the longer term, insurance companies will find other very opportune ways to be able to grow their business. There's one thing, Udayan, that came out very clearly in this budget, and I must specify that, and that's also related to this same insurance issue. I think the government, without saying it in so many words, has clearly given a strong message. Comply with the spirit, not with the form. If you look at this change, which is where people were using tax as an incentive to protect themselves from what was otherwise a saving product, or you look at MLDs, where people were using a debt instrument and camouflaging it. Camouflage is perhaps a stronger word, but presenting it as a capital instrument to create tax arbitrage between normal interest income of 25% and long-term capital gains of 10%. Government seems to have, it's a similar thing, the change that they have made in the InvIT and REIT structure, where if debt was being paid from the operating company to the InvIT or the REIT company, and then it was flowing through in the same character, although part of it clearly was repayment of capital without the capital adjustment. In all such instances, the government seems to have given a message that try and look at the spirit of the legislation, try and comply with the spirit of the legislation. If there are any loopholes, it's a matter of time before we shut them.
MLD certainly has been shut now. But the one sore point year after year, Ashok, is the lack of disinvestment, lack of progress and success in disinvestments. Because, it seems difficult to understand why in a market which is quite stable, where companies are raising billions of dollars of capital, the government cannot get even $10 billion done in a year, sometimes much less than that. I mean, the government did $4 billion, maybe not even that last year. What is the problem according to you, and how can this be resolved?
I have to tell you, Udayan, that if there was one place in the budget where I felt disappointed on the macro side, I think the tax numbers are bang on, the GDP number, the borrowing number, everything is so. I mean, the maths is so correct, and it is so real. The only number which was a disappointing number was really the divestment number for me. Because remember, out of 61,000, they have said 10,000 crores is repayment of loans, so it's 51,000. And out of 51,000, IDBI alone hopefully gives you a multi-billion-dollar payback. So what are you left with as a target? RDBI is work in progress. There's no debate in my mind that at some point of time during the current year, there will be a transaction in IDBI. So what are you left by way of a target? Very, very small sum. And that's a disappointment, because at a time when government is really trying to rein in fiscal discipline and demonstrate that less governance is better, less government involvement, is better governance. I think the only thing I can say is that government is probably understating it, as they did with the tax collection numbers last year, on the basis that understatement and over-delivery is a significantly better strategy. And I hope that's the case here too.
It probably is not, Ashok, because if you look at this year's example, they set a target of that too was reduced during the year of 60,000 crores plus, and they ended up doing only 31,000 crores, of which again, like you said with IDBI, LIC IPO was more than 20,000 crores. So hardly anything happened during the year. They couldn't even make half of their target last year. Same was the case the year before last. So it's not probably a question of under-promising and over-delivering, because the delivery is just not there. I mean, you run such a large investment banking house. You must be advising the government on many transactions and mandates. Is there something that we are missing? Because it cannot be so difficult to sell some of these assets.
No, it's not. I mean, government embarked upon a new program last year, as you know, when they transferred a lot of the transmission assets and NHAI assets into an InvIT. And there was a huge demand, and there continues to be a huge demand. I mean, I would argue that there are many other places, rolling stock for the railways, transmission business, where if government was to announce creation of InvITs, there is enough and more capital waiting to be invested with the government in those projects. And that does allow the government to recycle its capital and build new projects. So I don't think that there is any dearth of opportunities should the government wish to implement a stronger disinvestment program. Why is it not happening? Very, very, very unclear to me, honestly. because the opportunity is out there for sure.
You made the point about the expectation being that there will be less government and more corporate ownership of these assets. The same thing was pointed out yesterday by many industrialists who said, or some mild critics of the budget who said, the government is doing the heavy lifting year after year with capex as well. And we thought that the government would recede from the picture and the corporates would be doing the heavy lifting. Is that a bit of a surprise that, contrary to the stated position many years ago, that the government would recede and cede the business space to India Inc., the opposite seems to be happening now?
So let's break it into two parts: general capex and infrastructure. I mean, let's face it, government has to do heavyweight lifting on the infra projects. We see this around the world, where large infrastructure projects are being implemented, and India does need significant amount of that. That the private sector is a little slow and eventually tends to catch up. If you look at perhaps the last 12, 18, 24 months, you will see that government has been able to access a lot of private capital, even if it, as I said, is through this InvIT and the REIT program. That REIT is more, of course, for the private sector, but the InvIT program that the government has implemented for both the NHAI and the transmission projects. So on infra, I think government has little choice but to continue leading from the front. Also remember, it does have a multiplier impact on employment, which has been one of the other reasons we've been kind of watching and seeing how the government expense and allocation to infrastructure works. On the private sector capex, the other piece, we are all a little disappointed that private sector has been a little slow, but you can attribute it to two reasons. To begin with, corporate balance sheets were rather stretched, and the banking sector balance sheets were even more stretched. So then the question was, where is the capital and where is the debt for corporate India to kind of really take that big initiative? Over the last 3 years, that's been one of the most remarkable changes in India, that corporate balance sheets have become so much more healthier, promoter pledges have pretty much gone away, and banking balance sheets have become so much more credible to be able to lend now. So I think the atmosphere is now set for larger doses of private capital to be forthcoming and more capex to be incurred. And then, of course, we had 2-year COVID cycle, and nobody could think about anything but protecting what they had. So I would argue and say that government had no choice but probably continue to lead through this period when corporates were stretched, where banks were stretched, where COVID was probably the big challenge in front of everybody else. And hopefully the benefit of having led from the front will be seen now as more and more corporates promise to incur larger capex.
Finally, I must ask you, Ashok, about the events of the day of the budget, because in the afternoon, after a good response from the market, we saw what happened with the Adani Group stocks and how the market lost sight of the budget quite completely. And the same evening, we saw that the FPO was pulled out. I mean, you speak to so many global investors all the time. What impact is all of this happening, this very sordid episode which doesn't seem to be going away?
Listen, I mean, hopefully it's an isolated incident, and I think the group is strong enough, robust enough to be able to address the challenge that's come up. It's happened in the past in corporate India, and hopefully it's a matter of short time before the market kind of moves on with what it must move on, which is review earnings of many companies and determine valuation of those companies, so that we can all get back to normal business.
Ashok, it's a pleasure talking to you as always, and I think you've demonstrated amply today over the last half an hour why you are the man to go still for the union budget. It's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for your time.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.